So here's the thing. The relationship I had with my ex-wife is not like the relationship most of you have with your wives. When I met Laura, she was without a doubt the most beautiful and charming woman I have ever had the pleasure of meeting. We met at university while I was finishing my bachelor's degree in engineering, and we dated on and off for over a year before I first asked her to marry me. When I was with her, it was almost impossible to breathe. This woman took my breath away. That's how fascinated I was by her. I couldn't take my eyes off her. I thought everything she did was absolutely perfect. In my opinion, she is almost perfect. But there is a big fly in the ointment in this ointment. Not everything was perfect outside of my biased world. Fantasy and reality were very different. When I asked Laura to marry me, she refused. I know when I'm being rejected, and that's why I gave up on the idea of living with her and moved on. Oh, we still dated from time to time, but there was no expectation on my part that we would be together as a couple. However, women like Laura get under your skin like a bad itch. They don't go away quickly, even when you want them to. In a way, they are like an illegal substance that you become addicted to. I compare it to needing 2 cups of coffee almost every morning before I can function properly in this world. If I get 1 cup, I can last, but I really prefer 2. Laura is the same. If I spend some time with her, it's better than not spending time with her, and better than spending time with someone else. I need a certain amount of it before I can get on with my day. I know it's hard to explain, but if you've ever had an obsession with something, then you know what I'm talking about. It defies explanation. This defies logic. It just is. But the problem with Laura was that she was resistant to a solution that would have any long-term meaningful effect. Laura was the woman I wanted, but the woman I knew would bring me no good. You see, the fact is that Laura was biologically incapable of being with only one partner. Sounds pretty ridiculous, doesn't it? I thought so. But Laura was and remains convinced that she is not able to survive with one man. It took me a long time to come to terms with this. Believe me when I tell you that I thought this woman was mentally ill. The idea that I would put up with this kind of behavior when we were in a serious relationship was very foreign to my way of thinking. So, I dated other girls and decided to keep looking for Miss Perfect. During my search, I found several suitable candidates. Over the course of about 2 years, there were at least 5 women who I thought would be great companions in life, but for one reason or another, none of them succeeded. 2 were particularly needy and wanted to start planning their lives from the very first date. They planned the number of children we would have, where we would live, the pattern of the curtains in the house, and what nice dishes we would have for special occasions. It was all a little too much for me too fast. So I moved on, but very carefully, because I believed in not burning bridges unless it was a strategic move designed to lead to a better long-term outcome. A couple of the women were very casual and made it clear that marriage was not on their radar. So I had fun with them for a couple of months and moved on. One was especially unusual. She decided that she wanted to be a priest in the Episcopal Church. Her call to God was sudden, and I didn't expect it. But I guess whatever makes you truly happy is what you need to do. During all these tense relationships, I still talked to Laura from time to time and met her in clubs or other places. She similarly experienced a series of rapid courtships that lasted from several days to several months. I was busy getting an education and decided that was my priority. After graduating from college with honors, I got a job in the Seattle area. It didn't take me long to realize that I wanted more, so I left for 2 years. I'll tell you about this later. When I returned to Seattle, I went back to work for the same company I had worked for. In some ways, it was as if I had never left at all, but everything was different. During these 2 years, I have never been home. I didn't have time, and I certainly never saw or even talked to Laura. Honestly, after she rejected me, I decided that I needed to move on. I can take a hint. I know when I'm not needed. So, I have a new mission in my life. Become a great engineer, make a lot of money doing it, and maybe meet someone who makes me happy and have a family. This is what I wanted. But we don't always get what we want. On a Friday night, a couple of months after I moved back to Seattle, I went for a drink and a bite to eat during happy hour at a downtown establishment frequented by those willing to pay inflated prices for beer and food just to be seen in a decent place. But what the hell, I lived downtown in a tiny one-bedroom apartment and could easily get home, so I went out, had some fun, and thought about trying to meet some nice women. Lo and behold, who do I see? Laura. She asked about what was going on in my life. I talked about this, omitting the details. Her perspective and comments were interesting. I got the impression that she was storing it away in her mind for later use. I thought she thought I was a lonely loser who couldn't date women. A couple of days later, one night, Laura called and asked to come. I realized with some amazement that she had been keeping my cell phone number for the last almost 3 years. I didn't change it even when I moved to Canada because their cell phone plans are crazy expensive, and it was cheaper for me to keep my US number and plan. Anyway, I thought, what the hell? Why not? So I invited her to come. I found a bottle of wine to serve and quickly cleaned up the kitchen and living room. My apartment wasn't very big, so it only took a few minutes. I loaded and turned on the dishwasher when the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, I was greeted by a very beautiful woman. "Hello, Dan, Laura, please come in." She hugged me and kissed me. We drank some wine and sat and chatted as if we were long-lost friends. I was damn curious about her sudden appearance. Why now and what was on her agenda? Laura always thought about her future and always planned her next steps. She usually has a plan B and a plan C in her pocket. Which one was I? And was I a lifeline from an annoying boyfriend who wouldn't take the hint that his time with her was over? Of course, after some small talk, and in her smart, roundabout way, she revealed the point of her visit. She wanted to start dating again. She wanted to date me. I had to wonder what had changed for her to suddenly come to the conclusion that I was the one she should be dating. I mean, if I wasn't the one before, what suddenly made me the guy who was now number one on her dance card? I figured I hadn't changed much in the past 2 years, so she must have had some kind of awakening or realization. What this realization was, I had no idea. But what the hell? In the end, I agreed. A year later, Mayu and Lara are engaged. I know what you're thinking. My little head thinks for my big head. She turned you down before. I had a ring in my pocket. I knelt down in front of her and asked her to marry me. She said, no. So I got the message that I'm not the one she needs. She was part of the reason I went east to Canada. 2 years of absence passed quickly for me. I studied and worked 12 to 16 hours a day and rarely had time to party. I took this time to learn as much as I could about my profession and took advantage of the world-class opportunities that the Canadian University offered. The past year has challenged my expectations of a normal relationship. You see, I had no intention of asking Laura to marry me, only to be told again, no. I felt like Charlie Brown when Lucy snatches the football from him every time he's about to kick. This time she asked herself. But her way of asking was different. Laura was an enigma. She told me she was in love with me, and she told me she wanted to be with me. But we had to be together on the condition that she could satisfy her needs. She knew she could have me in almost any way she wanted. I know she knows that after she rejected me earlier, I really shouldn't have let her in the door that night. I should have said, "Sorry, Laura, I'm not interested." But I didn't. I'm weak when it comes to her, and she knows it. So the effect of having a woman who attracted me more than anyone else, but knew she was bad for me and asked me to marry her. Well, you know what my answer was. This time we discussed our relationship. We made a deal that I felt, albeit somewhat reluctantly, would allow us to be happy and be a couple. At least that's what I thought. We would have an open marriage. The deal was that we could both have relationships with other people. The commitment we agreed to had rules that we both had to follow. There were certain restrictions on what we could do, who we could do it with, and how much time we spent with other people. In my mind, we were meant to be married to each other after all, and again, in my mind, that meant that Laura was my priority, and I hoped that I was her priority. But we have to set rules for our lives away from each other. If I didn't agree to this, I knew that Laura would eventually leave my life and that I would regret it. Maybe I would regret agreeing to this lifestyle. A knot in my stomach would appear whenever I thought too much about it. I knew I had to be very careful with her and not get too possessive. Turning into a caveman outside of the bedroom will only push her away. Agreeing to an open marriage was, I suppose, like giving a person with an addiction a tiny share each day to chase away the cravings that would otherwise take over. If Laura knew she could have multiple partners and get her needs met, it would ultimately control her cravings. Whether it was good or bad, I didn't know, but it was what we needed to do to have a marriage, no matter how stupid it may sound. My attraction to Laura was inexplicable. I guess you could say I loved her unconditionally. So, if agreeing to an open marriage meant I could have her, then that's what I was willing to do. Some of you may think that I'm really stupid and spoiled, and maybe you're right. I mean, what kind of husband would agree to allow his wife to be with other men without consequences for the marriage? So we sat down and had a series of intimate conversations about what an open marriage meant for both of us and our individual expectations. Here are some of the things we talked about. We set boundaries: who, what, where, when, and how much. I was very concerned that Laura might be contacting unknown men. The chances of a bad ending were high, and to be honest, that was what I feared most. There had to be some kind of familiarity and testing of the other person. We also made a strict rule that neither of us would bring the other partner into our apartment. We made a schedule of what we were going to do together and promised not to let any connections get in the way of it. We also promised that we would limit our extramarital activities to no more than once a month. We would try to coordinate so that we would both be out at the same time, but we agreed to be flexible if something that was a priority wasn't on the schedule. We set emotional boundaries. If a casual relationship turns into love, what will that mean for our marriage? I told Laura that if she was looking for love, then she should have told me directly and honestly. If her love for me was so weak, then maybe it was a bad idea for us to get married. I didn't put it that harshly, but that's the gist of our conversation about love and sex. Sex with other partners excluded love. I know most people have a hard time having sex with someone they don't have some basic feelings for, but that should have been one of the things that should have defined an open marriage. I didn't want to share my wife's love. I wanted to be the only man she loved. I wanted her to be the only woman I loved. How much time could be spent with other partners? There are time limits, and this meant no overnight stays or weekends. Our marriage should have been the first priority for our time. Plan how often we will review what we are doing and decide to continue or change something or stop altogether. We agreed that we would discuss different things every 2 weeks. It wouldn't be our date night. It was purely a fun time for us, so we thought a Sunday afternoon might be the best time. We agreed to be open and honest with each other and talk about problems, especially jealousy. This was going to be the killer of this open prenuptial agreement. Human emotions are always present and difficult to put aside. We cannot allow jealousy to affect our marriage. It all seems so clinical and maybe cynical and maybe also bad. But we agreed to try to make it work. And during the first 2 years of married life, this was the case. And then it stopped working. Laura was happy. I was happy. Life was busy, and we came to terms with the fact that we each had our own personal lives. Quietly, oh so quietly, we continued to live as a couple and apart. Laura had a string of lovers that she dated, and I had 2 different women that I dated. And then this number was reduced to 1. We did a lot of family activities, such as vacations, weekend activities, and hobbies. I am a cyclist and enjoy competing locally in Washington and Oregon. I'm not that bad at it, but I rarely win. If I manage to finish in the top 10, I consider it a good day. I have 2 bikes. One is a Trek Road Racer, and my main bike is actually a Rocky Mountain Growler that I bought for just under $1,000. It's sophisticated and suits my needs. I have no illusions that I'll ever be a champion of any kind or a Tour de France competitor, but it's something I really enjoy, and it's a damn good workout. On days when I can't get out on one of my bikes, I run or try to get to the gym. My mother and father recently retired. My father was an engineer and made a very good living. He also invested everything he could early on in the technology sector and is now reaping the benefits of that. He and his mom bought a trailer, a huge monster, and they travel around North America. I have an older brother who is studying to become a doctor, which takes forever, and a younger sister who wants to become a lawyer and sue doctors. She makes this joke every time she sees our brother. He doesn't laugh. Neither my brother nor my sister are related by marriage, and as far as I know, they are not in any serious relationship. I began my education to earn a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering from Washington State University. I enjoy figuring out how to make things work, how to develop new solutions to complex problems, and doing it responsibly. We cannot continue to pollute the planet and still have a place to live. So, to take it one step further, I went back to university to pursue a master's degree in mechanical engineering. The university in Eastern Canada is one of the best in the world for training professional engineers, so I spent 2 years there working hard to learn from the best, and I did it. My wife, Lara Mary Donaldson, she is originally from Seattle. As I said earlier, we met at the University of Washington. She studied business and first took a job with a large company in the field that specialized in computers and software. Laura currently works for a large national bank in the bank's commercial lending department. She makes good money, and they even pay employees annual bonuses that amount to about 20% of their annual salary. Her family is in the area. Her mother and father are alive and well, but her father has just retired. He spent his career in the army as an officer and is a very level-headed, serious guy. Her mother is an elementary school teacher, and she plans to retire at the same time as Laura's father. They plan to travel as much as possible. Laura has an older sister who lives in California. Laura is about 5 feet 8 inches tall and weighs only 125 pounds. She is a strikingly beautiful blonde. She could become a Victoria's Secret model if she wanted. I think that's why she attracts so many men, like moths to a flame. And say she's mine, well, I won the lottery, but not completely. Looks like I'm sharing this lottery prize a lot more than I'd like. After 2 years of our marriage, Mo the mobile phone is chirping. This woke me up. I know I need to take a look at it. This is important because it could be Laura. She spends the night with a friend. It's already 6 a.m. We shouldn't have done this. It was against the rules to spend entire nights. I'm not sure how we let that creep into the agreement we made. I guess the agreement was left behind. This doesn't make me happy. I keep trying to bring this up, but I keep putting it off. I looked at the screen. It was a number I didn't recognize. I thought about not answering, as it was most likely a spam call from Mumbai telling me that my computer was throwing errors. But again, since Laura wasn't home, I knew I had to answer, just to be sure. In a weak voice, I answered, "Hello." There was a cry on the other end of the line, and I immediately became alert, sitting up straight in bed. "Laura, is it you?" Her voice trembled, and I immediately realized that there was a big problem. She cried and sniffled at the same time, trying to speak. "Den?" "Laura, I'm right here." "What happened, Laura? I need you to come get me right now." "Where are you?" "I'm in Warfield, downtown." "I know where it is. What's wrong? What's happened?" "I need you to come get me. I need you to bring me a change of clothes. Come soon, please." I tried to ask her for some details, but she hung up after giving me the room number and repeating that she needed clothes. I'm her fortune teller's sports bag and ran to his car. We lived in a rented 2-bedroom apartment in Kirkland. It wasn't that far from the city center, but when you're in an emergency, it seems like it takes forever to get there. Luckily, it was early and there was no traffic. I stopped in front of the hotel, grabbed my bag, and ran inside to the elevator. When I got to the floor she was on, I took the wrong direction and had to turn back. The seconds it took to do this seemed like an hour. I knocked on the door and called my wife's name. I heard movement on the other side of the door, and the door slowly opened. When I entered the room, I was shocked by what I saw. Laura rushed towards me, and I hugged her very tightly. It was clear that Laura had been beaten. I was almost speechless. I picked her up and carried her to the bed. I'm here, baby. You're safe now. No one will hurt you anymore. My heart was racing, and I could tell my blood pressure had reached heart attack levels. I was angry, very angry. But right at that moment, I had other priorities. I needed to get Laura out of there as quickly as possible and take her to the hospital. Honey, I need you to wear this. I pulled out the clothes I bought her and helped her get dressed. I looked around to see where her things were and couldn't find any of her clothes. I did find her leather purse and found that it contained her wallet and other things. I called her cell phone to see if it was hidden and heard it ringing under the bed. I fished it out of its hiding place and threw it, along with her purse, into the bag in which I had brought her workout clothes. MWE got the hell out of there and into my car. I headed to the nearest emergency room, but she put her hand on my shoulder and asked me to take her home instead. Jesus Christ, you need to see a doctor. I will, but right now, just take me home, please. Reluctantly, I agreed to take her home. When we entered our apartment, she headed straight to the bedroom and then to the shower. She spent almost an hour there. Laura took a shower, put on flannel pajamas, and climbed into bed. I knew we would have some difficult discussions in our future, but for now she needed to rest and heal. She slept for almost 12 hours before she appeared in the kitchen. I was sitting at the kitchen counter when I heard her bare feet walking down the hallway. She looked at me shyly as I motioned for her to sit down. I made her vegetable soup and a chicken sandwich. She needed a little refreshment. How do you feel? A little better. Showering and sleeping helped. The expression on my face probably gave away everything I was thinking. You go to the doctor and don't argue. I already called and made an appointment. After you eat, get dressed and I'll take you. Laura looked at me with a slight frown, telling me that she would rather ignore the giant elephant in the room than go to the doctor. I already told them that you were abused and that you want to take a full list of tests. She stared at the bowl of soup, and although she didn't argue, I knew she would rather not go to the doctor at all. Half an hour later, we were in the car and walking a few blocks to the doctor. I was honest with the nurse when I called and told her exactly what happened and what needed to be done. It was clear to me that Laura had happened. My first priority was to get my wife medical attention. My second priority was to find out who she was with at the hotel, and then I was to pay that person a little visit. The doctor came out after examining Laura, and the expression on her face spoke volumes. What the hell happened to your wife? She didn't wait for my answer before she continued. Because I think I'm calling the police now. I nodded my head and exhaled. Please call, she won't let me do it. Several hours passed after the police took statements from Laura and the doctor, and we went home. As for me, I needed to figure out something before we went too far. But first we went home. Over the next few days, we didn't say much to each other. I think Laura was hoping she could just forget about the whole thing. She hoped that over time the problem would disappear. But it wasn't that easy. 3 weeks have passed, and Laura has been back to work for 2 weeks. I took a couple of days off, but then went back to work. The temperature in our apartment was definitely cold. I knew I had to talk about the elephant in the room. So after dinner on Friday, I poured Laura a glass of wine and said to her, "Laura, we need to talk." Her expression was one of pure panic. I sat down at the dinner table and motioned for her to do the same. You might think it's a little formal, but that's how I wanted it to be. This wasn't supposed to be a casual conversation. This conversation was supposed to be one of those that defines a relationship. Laura, I'm afraid for you. I don't want to see you get hurt physically, but right now I'm not sure you're doing what you should do, that you'll agree to do what you should have done to keep yourself safe when we agreed to an open marriage. I'm afraid that you will actually get hurt or die. I want you to stop dating other men. At that time, I had or else in my head, but I didn't say it. What was different for me was that I couldn't stay married to her and watch her destructive behavior. I was so angry with her that I was shaking. I stood up and began to pace around the room. I had to remember to be calm and sit down, which I did. I'm really worried about you. What you did was reckless and stupid. What were you thinking? Laura looked at the table and shivered noticeably. Dan, I thought he was okay. I had met him before, and this was the second time we met at a hotel. He used to be cute. I started to fume. Well, damn it. Did you break a whole bunch of rules that we agreed to when we got married, or did you forget about them? Because it seems to me that it is so. You didn't tell me all the usual things you were supposed to tell me. I can't trust you anymore. What the hell am I supposed to think? What the hell am I supposed to do? Laura was silent and looked at her glass of wine. She took a long sip and exhaled as if she had been holding her breath for hours. I took a small sip and continued to outline my plan, which I thought was necessary. Laura, I'm leaving for a while. I can't stand it anymore. I worry about you all the time, and I know I'll get ulcers from this mess we've become. She raised her head and looked at me with a lost expression on her face. What I just told her was something she didn't expect. She didn't say a word. Laura knew that my love for her was great enough for me to put up with a lot. I mean, I agreed to let her have sex with others just so I could be around her. I dated another woman from time to time, so I guess you could say, in fairness, that we were both equally to blame for the current situation we found ourselves in. When we got married, I thought it was something that would quickly disappear, especially if we had children. I know that having kids outweighs almost everything else, so I was counting on it to fix us. We would both be monogamous with each other. Our wild oats would be seated and in the rear-view mirror. We could be a normal family, but things didn't turn out quite like that. Laura had me for safety and to pretend that she was normal, that we were just another average married couple with careers and plans for the future. Over the past year, Laura has increased her extramarital affairs from our agreed upon once a month to every week. Our sex life was steadily running out. As my time with my wife dwindled, I quietly spent more time at work, and with one woman I got to know quite well. I met her at university. Her name is Sarah Ann Walker. She is about 30 years old, divorced, and has a 2-year-old daughter. Sarah is an architect and has worked on a number of projects that I was involved in during my master's. Sarah has beautiful brown hair, and while you wouldn't say she's drop-dead gorgeous, she has classic features and a posture that will immediately captivate you. She is about 5'10" tall, fit, and moves with a grace that attracted me to her when I first met her. She is probably the smartest person I know and has a talent for being insightful and wise beyond her years. Shortly after we met, we spent about a month working together on a building project for a technology company. They wanted it to be green, and that meant we had to implement all the latest LEED standards to ensure it had the smallest carbon footprint their budget would allow. I can build almost anything and make it carbon neutral, but it takes money. And many companies want to be able to say they are environmentally friendly, but also have a budget in mind. So Sarah and I collaborated on the design and worked to meet the client's needs. This meant spending several long days together, and while we did this, we got to know each other better. One thing led to another, and we soon developed a friends with benefits relationship. We both had needs and talked about ourselves and our families. I suggested that Laura meet with her, and they could talk to make sure everything was open. I didn't hide anything. I know some of you reading this are thinking this is a little weird or that I'm a complete idiot, but this is who we are or were. The psychology of love and attraction is not necessarily always completely logical. What attracts one man to a woman may not attract another. Some men like tall women, others like shorter women. Some men like thin women, and there are men who like full-figured women. All people are different, and desires change over time. This is one of the factors contributing to the nearly 50% divorce rate. If we were all completely satisfied with our partners all the time, there would be no divorce. I have a good friend, a couple of years older than me. He's about 5'9", skinny build. He weighs about 150 pounds, and he's madly in love with his wife, who is the same height, but one of those full-figured women. She's not fat, but she has curves in all the right places and is a very beautiful woman. They love each other very much and have 4 children. I envy him and his luck. So I was drawn to Sarah, and she was drawn to me. Our arrangement was what I needed. It was stable. Unlike Laura, who enjoyed the hunt for new and different partners, I needed stability in my relationships. Are you asking right now? What the hell are you doing with a wife who wants relationships with other men? And you would be right to ask this question. I asked myself the same question many, many times. And every time the answer comes, because I think I'm emotionally stupid when it comes to Laura. What I mean is that even though we have expressed our love for each other, there is still that part of my wife that can't commit to just me. And this is the part that hurts the most. This latest incident at the hotel in Seattle was a great learning experience for me. There had to be a change in our relationship. This had to mean either that Laura was monogamous with me or that our marriage was over. I knew deep down that our open marriage agreement would not survive. At the end of the day, I wanted a family, and so the simple fact was that if we were going to have children, we couldn't continue to live the way we were living. We had to change. I had to change. I had to survive. So that Friday night, we sat down at the dinner table and had a very frank discussion. I told Laura that I was leaving her for a few weeks. This was not discussed. We both needed space to figure out what was important to us and what the path ahead looked like, together or apart. Laura stared at me with a very pained expression on her face. Please, Dan, don't leave me. I promise I will do a better job of following our agreement. Laura, I'm no longer sure that you remember what our agreement is. You continually ignored everything we mutually agreed was necessary if we were going to get married, and yet still allowed you and me to see others from time to time. But it got out of control. I took a small sip of beer. Please don't sit here and tell me it didn't happen. I'm not that stupid and gullible. God, you still have some bruises on your body and marks on your s'more have not completely disappeared. Laura took a long sip of wine and looked at the table. Her lack of response told me that she agreed, or at least that I was right, even if she didn't agree. I continued. I'm going to leave for a while. I can't stay here and watch you self-destruct. I will not do it. You have to figure out what the hell you want. If you want to stay married to me, then we have to make some changes, and we have to do it now. Otherwise, I think we're done. Here it is, my summary. I looked at Laura, who continued to look at the table and did not say anything. Her lack of words spoke volumes. I knew deep down that she wasn't going to change. She wasn't going to be my wife, not the wife I really wanted. The silence in the room was deafening. The moment I looked at her and she refused to look at me, I knew exactly what she wanted. It wasn't me. I got up from the table, went to the bedroom, and started packing my things. I figured all I needed was about a week's worth of stuff. By the end of the week, I would know if I was moving out permanently or if we might have little hope for our marriage. Laura said nothing as I worked to gather the things I needed. I walked out with a suitcase, a gym bag, and a laptop bag. I grabbed a few more things from the closet by the front door. My bikes and helmets were in a storage room in the underground garage. It didn't take long to put them on the bike rack on my car. My car was actually a small Subaru Crosstrek SUV. My bike rack slid into the trailer hitch, so it was easy to put on and take off. The Crosstrek is a great vehicle for me. It has great 4WD and plenty of room for all my sports gear. It is also relatively economical to operate and easy to park. The best of all worlds, and this thing doesn't break. It didn't take me long to load everything into the car, and I slowly drove off. Laura stayed in the apartment. In my heart, I knew that I was moving away from my marriage and my old life. Laura, fine. I spoiled it all. Everything was going well for me, and now I had angered the only person who was willing to put up with me and give me what I wanted. Dan is a good husband, too good. I'm the one who set the terms for our marriage, and now I've ruined it. Why can't I be happy with one man who loves me? Why do I need thrills every week? God, I want this every day. So what the hell should I do? Dan thinks I need help. Psychological help. Maybe so. He saved me a few weeks ago when I was in deep trouble with a guy I knew liked to be rough. This bastard was finished. I wouldn't go near him again. Maybe. Dan was furious that I went to the hotel that night with that guy. But I really didn't think it would turn out like this. This is my problem. I didn't think so. Maybe I really need help. Maybe it's already too late. It's too late for me to save my marriage. It's too late to save my relationship with Dan. Dan. For the first couple of days, I moved in with a friend. Spending the night in his spare room got boring very quickly, and so I decided that I needed a break from everything. So I called work and arranged a couple of weeks off, then grabbed the bikes and hit the trails in the hills east of town. I needed to go outside, work my ass off, clear my head, and figure out what was important to me. It took several days of not thinking about anything at all before I was able to address Laura's problem. On the fourth night, I took out my notebook and wrote down some of the thoughts that came into my head. You would think that I would use the notes feature on my mobile phone for this, considering that I deal with high technology every day. But this time I went the old-fashioned way and used pen and paper. The central question that came back to me every time was how to separate my wife. When I decided to marry Laura, I thought it would be worth sharing the fear of having her be my wife 90% of the time. 90% of her was better than 0% of her. At least that's what I thought at the time. Now I'm not so sure anymore. The 10% I don't have destroys the 90% I do have. Does this make any sense at all? Lately, it seemed like she was with me 20% of the time at best. I felt like I was a nuisance in her life. She often forgot about what we planned to do and called me at the last minute to say she was going to do something else. I understood very clearly what something else meant. She was my wife in name only, just a piece of paper that connected us. I was an afterthought. And oh yeah, I need to see my husband every now and then. 80 miles of forest trails on a mountain bike can give you a new perspective on life. Doing this for 5 days in a row will help you challenge even your most strongly held beliefs. I made several decisions this week, solutions that I knew were the ones I needed. During this time, I cut myself off from everyone. My cell phone was turned off, and I spent my nights in a tiny motel in the hills that barely had cable, let alone any internet service. I cleared my mind and my body, and at the end of the week, I returned to the city and used a rental service. I returned with that piece of paper on which I wrote down my innermost thoughts. It was also where I made decisions about my survival and my future. Returning to civilization, I spent some time doing maintenance and sanitation work. First, I had to clean my equipment and then get myself organized. I enjoyed almost 30 minutes of standing under a hot shower with a cold beer in my hand. It was time for me to gather my thoughts and finalize my plan for what I was supposed to do next. Sarah. I tried to contact Dan last week. I called his office and they told me he was taking time off, but they didn't know what he was doing. I also called him on his cell phone and left a message. I knew that he and his wife had an open marriage and that she liked to date other men. I knew Dan wasn't entirely keen on the idea. I also meant that our relationship was very casual and we made absolutely no commitment to each other and I had no expectations. Dan and I usually met once a week. That's all. Just fun. It was a fun time to blow off some steam. I figured he and his wife would eventually put the idea of an open marriage out of their minds. If they decided to have children, it would be a turning point for them, and they would eliminate the difficulties associated with other people. They would discover the need for monogamy. This was absolutely necessary for a successful family. My own husband decided that monogamy was not essential to his needs early in our marriage. He also discovered that being a father wasn't really his thing, and so decided it was in his best interest not to be married. We divorced. It was best for all of us, and he moved east to somewhere in Connecticut. Hartford, I think. He works for an insurance company. Once a month, I see a small check for his share of child support. I'm depositing a check into my daughter's education account. She's only 2 years old and doesn't even remember her father. Fortunately, I hardly remember him either. Dan is basically a good person. He has a strong sense of what is right and what is wrong. That's why I was surprised when he told me that he and his wife had an open marriage. Having gotten to know him better, I understood why. The why part was simple. At the most fundamental level, he loved his wife. But at the same time, he knew that she would never be completely his. She will never be able to fully devote herself to him. And so, to play his part in an open marriage, he met me, and we became useful friends. We've been friends with benefits for a few months now, and I have to say it's been great. I didn't want commitment when we started. I was burned by my ex-husband, and I won't let that happen again. The agreement also benefited Dan. He sees the other side of a relationship with a woman. I understood him very well, and immediately told him that what we had was just fun, and that I was not looking for commitment from him or anyone else. It also means I don't have to deal with the whole dating game, and God knows I don't have time for that crap. So Dan was good to me, and I was good to him. I'm just not sure how much longer we can go on like this. He's a great guy. Laura. Dan left me. He packed some things, took his mountain bike, and left. I'm not sure where he went. I called some of his friends and his work, and they don't know where he is, or if they do, they won't say. I'm not entirely sure what exactly his problem is. I mean, we agreed before we got married that we could date other people. He knows what I need. He agreed to let me date other men. I know he's a great guy. He's a great husband. This man does everything I want him to do. So why now? Why is this so hard for him to deal with? Yes, things went too far with that guy at the hotel. But that only happened once. And Dan has a girlfriend. He's dating some woman. I think her name is Susan. I'm not sure. I can't remember exactly. I think he met her at work or something. He told me a little about her, but I forgot most of what he said. So what's his problem? Dan will be back. He will deal with his pain and return. This man can't stay away from me for too long. Heck, I turned him down when he first asked me to marry him, and he came back. He's been gone for a long time and hasn't called. Maybe after he has a chance to realize what he's missing, he'll come to his senses. Maybe I'll call him in a few days. Dan. So, the last 2 weeks have given me the opportunity to reflect on my life, evaluate the mistakes I've made, what I want and what I need to do to achieve what I want in my life. Looking back over the past few years, I'm not sure I made the best decision marrying Laura. Yes, she is beautiful and she rocks my world, but that's where it all begins and ends. Maybe I was desperate when we decided to get married. Maybe she saw in me resistance to her crazy habits. I think that's probably how she sees it. I am the safe harbor to which she sails home. I can't be like this anymore. I need a few more days to fully understand everything, and then I have to get my life back on track. Sarah wrote to me yesterday. She asked if I was okay. I sent a 2-word reply. I will. She replied, let me know if I can help. Her text messages made me feel good. Sarah is a real person. Even though we're just friends with benefits, she lets me know that she actually cares about me. Maybe being a mother does that. I want to be a father. But deep down I know that Laura is not the woman who can become the mother of my children. This is such a nightmare. But now I have a much better idea of what I need to do to end this. Sarah. I hadn't heard from Dan in 2 weeks, and while that in itself wasn't a big deal, I was worried about him, so I decided to text him. I had to tell him that I knew that his wife was, how can I put it politely, completely crazy. Laura is using Dan. She uses it to create the illusion of a normal life, and as a safe place to be after dating her many boyfriends. Yes, I know that sounds harsh, but from what I know, it describes her exactly. Dan is a very loving man, and he deserves better than to be used by her. I watched my own marriage deteriorate. My husband was immature to the point that after we had Matilda, he decided that being a father and husband was not really in his future. He left both of us and took a mistress. When I found out about this, I kicked him out of the house. He was almost giddy as he walked away, knowing that his responsibility to me and the baby was over. Apart from the small child support check that arrives twice a year, I don't even think about it anymore. I do not need money. My career as an architect pays well. What I really need is a man with character and values and a strong sense of right and wrong. Dan might be that person. Watching Laura self-destruct is not something I wish for Dan or her, but I will watch and do what I think is right. I won't repeat the same mistakes I made before. I know it may seem cold, but Laura's loss could be my gain. Dan. Damn, I'm tired. It's more mental than physical. I went for a long run this morning, and it felt good to work hard and sweat. When I left at 5 a.m., there were only a few other runners there. By the time I finished at 8, the day was in full swing. People and movement. I have an appointment with a divorce lawyer this morning. I need to start the process. I need help. I know that Laura and I don't have a lot of physical things. We rent an apartment, but we both have cars and things. I'm still paying off my student loans, but I'm working on trying to save some money. I thought it would be nice if we had children. What a mess. Well, the meeting with the lawyer went pretty much as I expected. What I want is called a dissolution of marriage in this state. It states that the marriage is irretrievably broken and that there is no hope of saving the marriage. The easy part about this is that without children or a lot of belongings involved, it becomes a very simple process. An application is submitted to the court, and if both parties agree and the terms for terminating the contract are agreed upon, then the court simply stamps it, and we are free from each other. All this takes 90 days. I gave the lawyer a detailed list of our assets and debts and told him to get on with the paperwork. I will take the divorce petition with me when I go to Laura. I need to call her later this week after I return the documents and set up a time to talk to her. It's been over 2 weeks since I talked to her. She wasn't burning up the airwaves with calls or texts, so I'm guessing she was busy with one or more of her boyfriends. I haven't interacted with Sarah much, so I'm not sure what's going on there. Most likely, she stays away from me, realizing what a shit show my life has become. She doesn't need such complications in her life. I need to put Laura in the rear-view mirror and get back to work. In fact, Laura's mother called me yesterday. She tried to call her daughter, but had not heard from her for several weeks. When I told her I moved out, she was speechless. There was dead silence on the line. Finally, she asked, "What's going on, Dan?" I didn't want to say anything other than that we had some differences, and I felt it would be better if we spent some time apart. Laura's mother is an intelligent woman and knows a lot about her daughter's habits. She knew about Laura's addictions, but hoped that when we got married, she changed. Oh my God. Dan, is she still seeing other men? She got right to the heart of the matter. I hesitated. I'm afraid it's all gotten worse, and I can't live with her in this state. She has neither the desire nor the ability to change, and I don't know how to reach her. I have to leave her for my own sanity. I'm really sorry. She was quiet. I understand, Dan. You gotta do what you gotta do. Let me know if there is anything I can do to help any of you. With these words, she passed out. Laura, I need to talk to Dan, but I'm afraid to call him. I know he feels offended. Maybe it's better if I just leave him alone. I need to get out of here. I'm going crazy here in the apartment, waiting for him to call or come home. I do not know what to do. My mother called me and gave me my ass. She called me several names that I had never heard before. She wanted to know why the hell I cheated on Dan. I really couldn't tell her the truth now, could I? That's not what you tell your mother. So I admitted to some of my stupidity and left everything as it was. Damn, my phone is ringing and Dan's picture just appeared on the screen. Maybe he's coming home. Hello, Dan? A couple of seconds of silence followed. Laura, it's me. I need to talk to you. When is the right time? Any time you want, Dan. Tonight would be great. I'll cancel what I had planned. Damn, I shouldn't have said that. What time is right? I'll be home by 6, so any time after that. Fine. He passed out without any love you or bye or anything else. His voice sounded very cold and unhappy. I got home just before Dan showed up. He called to let me in. Don't you still have your key? I asked when he called. I wanted to make sure you were alone. Oh shit. He thinks some guy probably moved in with me as soon as he left. Please come in, Dan. We went to the kitchen. Would you like something to eat? When did you learn to cook? Sorry, that was a cheap shot. You don't deserve this. He was always a gentleman, always a nice guy. He behaved, as they say, like a knight. This is exactly the word. Do you have beer or maybe Coca-Cola in the refrigerator? Why did he ask for something from his own refrigerator? Oh shit, I finally figured it out. He doesn't feel like he lives here anymore. This is not his apartment anymore. He is a guest. I feel his pain in the lower abdomen. This discussion will not end well. I got up and went to the refrigerator. There wasn't much there. I haven't eaten much at home since Dan left. There was a lone bottle of beer hidden in the far corner of one of the shelves, and I moved some groceries around to pull it out. I went to the closet where we keep glasses and took one out for him. Thank you, he said, taking the bottle. He sat down at the table and placed the large envelope he was holding in his hand on the table next to him. He opened the beer and took a small sip. He didn't use a glass. I held my breath, waiting for him to speak. I sat down at the table opposite him, waiting for the hammer to fall. How are you doing, Dan? Thank you for having me. I've been thinking a lot, Laura. Thought about you and me and our marriage. Why did we get married? What I wanted. What you wanted. I realized something, and now I have a much better idea of what I want in the future. Here it is. I believe I deserve what he plans to do. Dan looked me straight in the eyes and continued. I'm not sure that what you want from marriage is the same thing that I want from marriage. I don't think you and I getting married was a good idea. I love you so much. But you want things and a way of life that I can no longer give you. I can't be a faithful husband waiting for you to come back from nights and weekends with other men. This is not what I want. I looked at the man who told me he loved me, and he was in the process of telling me that our marriage was over. I thought I loved you enough to do this, but I realized I couldn't do it anymore. I can't be the other man in your life. Heck, I even went and found another woman to fill the void when you didn't want to be my permanent wife. There was a pause while Dan looked at me. I stared at the table and at my hands. He continued, his voice very quiet. What kind of life is this for any of us? We can't be married to each other part-time. Maybe that suits you, but it doesn't suit me, not anymore. Another pause. Laura, I need a wife, a full-time wife. Another pause. You don't want what I want. It's not just me you need. I'm just not enough for you. Another pause. This time Dan slowly pushed the large envelope he had across the table towards me. When I looked at him, I realized that our life together was over. I immediately realized that I was wrong. I used Dan for my own pleasure. I used it to instill in people around me the idea that I was a responsible adult woman and that I could have a normal family. It was just a show. What's in the envelope, Dan? He looked at me, took a small sip of beer, and replied, I asked a lawyer to draw up a petition to dissolve our marriage. This is a request for divorce. This divides everything we have in half. I know we don't have much. Another pause. Laura, we are young. We have to move on and make decisions about what we both want. We both have to start over. You can do what you want, with whoever you want. He took another small sip of his beer. You need to take this to a lawyer and have him look at the documents. My lawyer says that since we don't own much, it's fair to both of us. In the envelope is my lawyer's business card. Have your lawyer contact my lawyer. I understand that once we both agree, they will file paperwork with the court, and within 90 days, it will become official. We are not married. I nodded my head and continued to look at the envelope, as if something was going to jump out of it at me. Is this what you really want, Dan? Laura, I can't continue to live like this. I can't share you with anyone else. I can't keep seeing you walk out the door knowing you're going to share yourself with other men. This is not a marriage. This is an arrangement, the one in which I will no longer live. We both deserve better. It allows you to do whatever you want without worrying about me, and this will allow me to find what I want. Dan took another small sip, put the bottle down, and stood up. He headed towards the door. I'm sorry, Laura, but I can't stay with you in this state of affairs. He walked out the door, closing it quietly. I noticed that he hardly drank anything from the beer bottle. I sat at the table for over an hour before getting up. I drank what was left in the bottle. I walked over to my cell phone and looked at it. I scrolled down my contact list and clicked on a specific number. It rang. I heard, "Hello. Robbie, what are you doing? Would you like to meet later? Dan." It wasn't easy talking to Laura. After spending almost 2 weeks mentally figuring out what I wanted, I learned a lot about myself. Yes, I loved Laura, but there are limits to what I'm willing to put up with because I realized that she doesn't love me. Her love was conditional. She took care of her needs first. Her needs are driven by sex. She needs the attention of many men, and therefore my need for a wife comes second to her. Oh, I know she says she loves me, but actions speak louder than words, as my father says, and even when she says she loves me, she thinks about other men. I won't be number two. Not anymore. Having no children makes the divorce process much easier. I didn't see the need to get angry and take revenge over this. When we did something together, it was great. But I realized that what Laura did to me was to make me happy so that she could have a different life. Laura didn't really like riding a bike, but she did it with me from time to time. She would go hiking with me, but I knew the idea of dirt and flies didn't really appeal to her. I hadn't seen or spoken to Sarah in weeks, and I thought she had turned to someone else to get her needs met. I wasn't sure if I should call her, so I didn't. Laura. 3 months later, I'm looking for a new apartment, smaller than this one. This is more than I need, and I want to live in the city center, closer to my work. It will also be closer to the social part of the city, which I like. Dan took a few more of his things that he needed, but he left most of the things with me. I heard that he moved to some place, but I'm not sure exactly where he moved. His friends care about him very much and don't tell me anything about him. I didn't call anyone from his family. The bank I work for is restructuring, and I was told that I would be working in a new department, but in the same building. Perhaps this is the change I need. I've cut back on my dating life, and I'm only dating one guy now. He's cute and reliable. He found out I had a reputation and told me he didn't like sharing in groups and shit like that. He directly said that if I wanted to be with other guys, he would leave at that moment. I promised him that I would improve, but I know that I will fail in the end. A girl's gotta do what a girl's gotta do. Sarah. So it's been a few months since I last saw Dan. I was busy at work and looking after Matilda, so time flew by. I hesitate to call him because I don't know what mental space he is in. Does he want to see me? Is he in a new relationship? Or is he taking a break from the relationship? I don't know. Maybe I need to make some careful inquiries. Dan. I work, bike, run, and do it over and over again. I'm in the best physical shape of my life, and I'm spending long hours at work doing the best work I can. And I'm so alone doing this. Laura did not call me or give any indication that she was willing to change in any way to save our marriage. I think this pretty much confirms what I knew. I hesitate to go out and try to meet a woman. I'm hesitant to put myself out there and become a victim again. I can't let Laura influence how I perceive other women. I mean, Sarah is nothing like Laura. Her whole outlook on life is much more focused on the important things. Family, home, career, doing the right thing, making the world a little better. I should call her and ask if she wants to meet this weekend. Maybe I could take her and Matilda camping. I'll arrange lunch. It would be nice. The weather will be perfect for this. Sarah. So Dan called me this morning. Things started out a little awkward as I hadn't heard from him in over 4 months. We talked for about half an hour. He said he called to ask if I didn't have any plans for the weekend if Matilda and I would like to go camping and have a picnic lunch with him. It was a bit unexpected. Not about the hike, but about the fact that he also invited Matilda with him. She is now 3 years old, and as you can imagine, a child that size has a lot of energy to get started, but can get tired quickly. It doesn't matter, I accepted the invitation. Now I have to dig out my hiking boots, and I have no idea where they are. Dan. I'm nervous as hell. I chose an easy hike and packed plenty of food and water for us. I have 2 hiking poles, but I'm not sure we'll need them. I packed a thin thermal blanket to sit on while we eat. I even cleaned my car. Heck, kids need car seats, don't they? I'm sure Sarah has it. When I pulled up to Sarah's house on Saturday morning around 10 a.m., she already had her car seat in the driveway, and I saw that she also had a backpack of stuff ready to go. I got out of the car and Sarah greeted me with a hug and a quick kiss. She looked fantastic. His hair was a little shorter, and she was dressed like a model from the Bean catalog. A plaid shirt, shorts, and hiking boots. I was getting excited just looking at her. Even though I had already met Matilda once, I introduced myself to her again. She was running around, and it didn't take a child psychologist to see that she was itching to go on an adventure. I secured the child's seat in the back seat, we loaded the gear into the trunk, and were off. I slowed down a bit when I realized there was a child in my car for the first time in my life. I felt a certain sense of responsibility for the safety of someone else that I had not experienced before. The hike started out great, but I soon learned that little girls need to pee a lot, especially when they drink a bottle of Coke on the way to start the hike. Sarah apologized, but I shrugged and said, "Hey, kids have to do what they have to do." I soon learned to manage my expectations for how far I planned to hike, and although I planned for us to get to the lookout and eat, we didn't get that far before our youngest hiker ran out of energy. So we stopped, laid out a blanket, and had lunch. I took my camera with me and took some pictures and also helped Matilda take some pictures. I didn't realize this until much later, but that day I had a job interview. Very important work. The interview was a 2-part interview, and both interviewers had to agree before I would actually be allowed into their lives as a result of the interview. In fact, the interview will last several months, and the interview will be fraught with a number of problems and important tasks. When we returned to Sarah's house, she invited me to come in and join them for dinner. I looked at her, and when I didn't answer right away, she said, "If you have other things to do, don't worry." I stuttered a little to say what I was thinking. "No, I don't have anything I'd rather do. Thanks. I would love to have dinner with you." When we got inside, I took off my hiking boots at the door, and Matilda grabbed my arm to pull me inside. She dragged me down the hall to her bedroom to show me her extensive collection of toys. So it was different, at least for me. She diligently showed off just about every toy she owned, including every pose her Toy Story dolls could do. She pulled the string on Woody's back, and he announced, "Someone has poisoned the water well." I had dinner with Sarah and Matilda. Eating with a small child constantly looking at you can be a little nerve-wracking. It's like being interrogated, only with silence. The steely gaze of a 3-year-old child can sway even the most determined. The police could use this tactic. They could get more confessions from the perpetrators. I was put to work helping prepare dinner while Matilda sat at the counter coloring. Her ability to do this was excellent considering her age. From time to time, she would ask my opinion on whether the balloons should be red, yellow, or both. I suggested that they come in different colors. This was met with a response, but I noted that she did use both red and yellow pencils. Dinner was great. I helped clean up, and then I was invited to read a story with Matilda on the sofa. I read most of it, but every time I missed even one word, I was told to go back and read that section again. I have been accused many times of being stupid. After Matilda was put to bed, Sarah and I sat in the living room and had a drink. I don't know how you do it. Being a mother and a very busy architect, how do you cope with it all? Sarah laughed and said, "Sometimes I bring work home at night, and I'm used to getting by on little sleep. Sometimes it's not easy." I nodded. When we started meeting once a month last year, we didn't talk about Matilda. Why? I wanted to separate that part of myself from her. I guess I have a good eye for detail. My needs are separate from my daughter's. So while I don't try to hide it, I don't advertise it, if that makes sense. I believe. I took a sip. She is a force to be reckoned with. I often see you in it. Another chuckle from Sarah. She likes you. Otherwise, she would not have allowed him to read to her. This made me laugh. I was going to ask if it was time for me to leave, but there was no need, Sarah. Sincere. A real woman who does not hide her true feelings, at least from what I can tell. Having a young daughter gives her a different perspective. She doesn't have time to play. For Laura, it's all about the game. Sarah. I know some people might think I was just waiting for Dan's marriage to fail and then claiming him. Maybe you're right. I knew Dan was a good man. I knew what he wanted. I knew he just had to figure it out himself. I also knew I couldn't push him too fast or too far. I had to step aside and let things take their course, and they did it. Dan's wife was a train wreck in slow motion. She couldn't see what was right in front of her. She couldn't see the wonderful man who was her husband, a man who truly loved her. He loved her so much that he agreed to share her just so he could spend some time with her. Laura was so deep in shit that she actually thought an open marriage was a viable thing. She thought she had enough self-control to handle her own affairs without harming her husband. That's funny. She didn't really care about her husband. Her actions spoke for themselves. When I met Dan and got to know him, I had just gotten divorced, had a daughter in kindergarten, and was working too many hours to build a career and make enough money to put a roof over my head and food on the table. I didn't want a relationship with any man that would lead to dating, and then commitment and all the normal things that a real relationship entails. No, but I also needed physical contact. I am a healthy young woman. When I got to know Dan and he told me what his marriage was like, I was stunned at first. I mean, what normal man would allow his wife to be with other men? But when I spoke to him in detail about his relationship, he emphasized that he wanted to give their lifestyle a chance. He also said that he eventually hopes Lara will give up her need for other men so they can be a real family. He wanted to have his own children, so we agreed on a friends with benefits agreement. Over time, I learned that Dan had a lot of love to give, and he needed a woman and a family to give it. He tried to give it to Laura, but she wouldn't take it. So I met Dan and very quietly learned what he wanted and what he was like. All I had to do was wait for Laura to ruin everything, and I knew she would, and in the end she did. I decided it was best to bide my time, give Dan time to come to his senses, let him figure out what he wanted, and then act. My plan worked just fine. Laura was unable to cope with her addictions and eventually drove Dan away from her. Even love has its limits, at least when it comes to marriage. I thought this woman was so lost in her thinking that she honestly thought Dan would put up with her crap forever. How the hell did she think this would all happen in the long run? All this came to his mind much earlier than I expected. Dan didn't say much about that night at the hotel, but I found out about it a little later. In fact, I heard about this completely by accident. I think one of the people I work with knows the guy who beat her up. So Laura's stupidity and inability to realize what she has might just be to my advantage. Dan is a wonderful person, and I know he wants a stable family. Matilda quickly becomes attached to him and enjoys playing with him. Dan brings her toys and gifts almost every time he sees her. There have never been so many flowers on the table in my house since we have been seeing each other. I try not to rush into anything. So far, my history of choosing good husbands is 0 to 1. But I can recognize a good man when I see one. Laura, I received a letter in the mail notifying me that my marriage is now officially over. I'm lonely again. Dan. Almost a year has passed since my marriage to Laura broke up. The past year has been a real challenge for me. Laura caused me incredible pain. She didn't fight for us at all. When I told her I couldn't live with her seeing other men, she didn't do or say anything to suggest that she might want to change to save our marriage. It told me very clearly where I was and how insignificant I was in her life and in her thinking. She thought so little of me that she was unable to even think about changing her lifestyle. Having a family was the last thing on her mind. The children were not in her sight. I wanted a family. I wanted stability in the form of a wife and children. I longed for this kind of life. Laura was not the woman I needed. Divorce was inevitable. I talked to our families, and they understood everything. Her family knew what Laura was like, and although they all wanted her to stop being an unfaithful wife, They understood when I left. Her family wished me well. Just when you thought life was no good, I was saved. Two people saved me. I thank my lucky stars every day that I was saved. Sarah, I need a husband who works full-time. My daughter needs a father who works full-time. I have a leading candidate in mind. My daughter asked me if Dan would be her dad. My only response so far has been, that would be great, wouldn't it? And she nods her head. Time to push things forward a little. Dan, I have a plan for the summer. This includes traveling and camping, but in a way that makes sense for all of us. My father and mother have a trailer. This is a huge thing that I call a land yacht. This is one of my dad's toys, and he and my mom travel with it quite a bit. They offered to lend it to me whenever I wanted, but I'd never wanted to use something so big and bulky before. My idea of camping is very different. But on the other hand, I've never spent the night at a camp with a small child before. Now, my father is not one of those who do things halfway. And when I divorced Laura, he congratulated me on finally sorting out my shit. I was an idiot, but I knew that he only wanted the best for me. At first, I interpreted his comment to mean that I was being stupid. But I knew that he knew that my relationship with Laura was complicated. So, in fact, he was telling me in his usual way that he was glad that I had straightened out my life. It was classic dad. My mother and father also knew that I was dating Sarah, and indeed they were meeting Sarah and Matilda one day when I stopped by my parents' house to drop off something. My mother greeted Sarah and Matilda as if they were royalty. She made a big fuss about Matilda and took her inside to feed her treats and milk. I believed that my mother believed that Matilda was as close to a granddaughter as she would ever get from me. I followed my father's example and decided to stay away. But now I began to look at life differently. I went from just me to us. I didn't think about what would be right just for me, but I started to keep in mind what could be best for Sarah and Matilda. So, as we got closer to summer and I started thinking about camping, I realized that camping with a small child was not the same as the camping trip I usually enjoyed. I liked to throw everything I needed on my back and go hiking in the mountains. Laura never did this to me. She didn't like being outdoors. There were too many bugs and too much dust for her, so I never did that with her. This time it was going to be completely different. I wasn't entirely convinced that driving a huge trailer over 30 feet long with a huge diesel engine was the way to go. However, my father, ever the pragmatist, put it this way. Women have to urinate a lot, especially at night, and they don't like wandering through the forest in the dark and suddenly seeing themselves face to face with a raccoon or maybe a bear. So grab the damn trailer and enjoy it. Plus, it's free. What the hell do you have to lose? And with these words, it was decided for me that I would take a land yacht on vacation. My father and mother are well off financially. My father is a very smart guy, and in addition to working very hard, he also invested wisely from the beginning and is now enjoying the benefits of that. He loves his big toys and is proud of his tech gadgets. The van is equipped with all modern amenities and even a satellite receiver and internet connection. My biggest challenge was figuring out how to operate this thing without killing us all or anyone else. When I proposed the idea, Sarah was skeptical at first, but Matilda was very excited. We even went to my parents' house, and my father let them look it over and showed them all the gadgets inside it. I warned him we were coming, so he hooked the whole thing up to electricity and water. The air conditioning cooled him inside, and the television above the front bunk was on. My mom brought freshly baked treats for Matilda and even showed her where she would sleep. This is the bunk above the driver's compartment. My dad even offered to hitch what he thought was a small car that he was pulling behind the van to use when they got to where they were going. I gave up on this and checked how to attach a bike rack to the back. So in mid-July, after a few driving lessons with my dad and his final approval that I was ready to go, the three of us hit the road to Wyoming and then through several other states en route to Colorado and then back to home. I figured this would be a make-it-or-break-it time. At the end of this trip, Sarah and I would know if we had a future together. The challenge of being together for so long and with a small child at that, was, I thought, a test of our compatibility. I was worried that I wasn't measuring up to what Sarah wanted in a relationship. I was also worried about my ability to interact with Matilda. I was nervous about the trip, so I decided that I should leave the raising of the children to Sarah and follow her example when it came to Matilda. The last thing I wanted was to do anything that would undermine her authority as a mother. I came to find out that Matilda had her own plans, if a 3-year-old can have plans. My dad installed a proper car seat for Matilda in the van so Sarah could be close by and see Matilda while we drove. Matilda had a good supply of toys and books to occupy her time, and we stopped often for breaks. We had lots of things to stop, do, and see planned, so this meant that when we did get out on the road, Matilda quickly dozed off in her seat. Sarah: "Oh my God, Matilda and I are with Dan in his mother and father's giant trailer. We spend the summer holidays together. This plan started out as just a camping trip, but turned into a luxury trip. I've never done this before, but after a couple of days I have to say it's nice to have a comfortable bed to sleep in at night and a great bathroom. Matilda just loves doing things with Dan and tries her best to monopolize him from the moment she wakes up until she falls asleep. Dan insists that we get away from the luxury of the trailer every day, and we do a lot of walking and biking. I have a special seat for Matilda on the back of my bike, but for this trip I was happy to let Dan put it on his bike. Besides, Matilda insisted. I think the trip was fun for all of us. I know Matilda was overjoyed, and me too. I saw a side of Dan that confirmed what I thought about him. He's a real man. He's smart, caring, thoughtful, and he really wants a family. I see it in everything he does. The look in his eyes when he's with Matilda, the look he gives me when we're alone. So I enjoyed this trip too, especially after Matilda went to bed and I had some time for just the two of us. When our vacation ended, I almost needed another vacation to take a break from the trip. I returned to work, and Matilda returned to kindergarten. She wanted me to take her to Dan, so I had to explain to her that he also needed to go back to work. I think she understood, but she was sad that he wasn't there. Dan. And so, the great land yacht adventure was crowned with success. We took the van back and thanked my mom and dad for using the beast. Matilda took my mother into the van and proudly showed her how the bunk she slept on lowered and where the switch was to make it happen. Then, after the bed was lowered into place, she put the ladder in place and crawled up. My mother was beside herself with the thought that maybe, just maybe, she would soon have grandchildren. My father walked around the outside of the van, looked it over critically, and asked me all the usual questions I knew I would get. Did I flush the water tank thoroughly? Did I fill the gas tank? All the things that are important to him. Yes, Dad, I did everything as you told me, and we also cleaned everything inside. I was laughing inside. I knew my father would walk barefoot on broken glass to do just about anything Sarah or Matilda might need. Wow. 2 weeks later, I invited Sarah to take a day trip in my SUV. We hit the road. According to forecasts, the weather promised to be excellent. We went on some great sailing trips, and although we didn't have the same amenities as a land yacht, we still managed. I had a chance to try and see if my grander plan was possible. Laura, it's been over a year since I last saw Dan. I moved to a new apartment closer to work. I'm dating a few different guys, but haven't gotten past my basic needs. I have to say that after Dan left, I began to question what my life was supposed to be like. I mean, I'm still young. I have plenty of time to settle down and get married again. Now I know it wasn't the best idea to take Dan for granted. This was wrong. I should have paid more attention to him, but I thought he understood what I wanted. I figured he didn't really care what I did as long as I paid attention to him sometimes, and we pretended to be a normal couple. Things didn't seem to go well together after we got married. He was fond of walking in the fresh air, and I don't like to get very dirty. He also liked the theater and wanted to see some plays, but I find it boring and prefer to go to parties and dances. The times we went out to do it, I found myself looking at some of the guys there, and I knew Dan could see me doing it. 2 months ago, I had health problems, and I went to my obstetrician gynecologist for an examination. She diagnosed the disease, gave me a prescription for some pills, and told me to abstain from sex for the next few weeks until the symptoms went away and the next test came back negative. She also recommended that my partners use protection. She knew a little bit of my story. Dan. So my plan is going well. I chatted quietly with Matilda, told her what I wanted to do, and asked her permission to ask her mother to marry me. I wanted to know that if I did this, would she want me to be her father? Her answer was unequivocal. Yes. After that, she was completely freaked out when I told her that I wanted it to be a surprise for her mother, so she couldn't tell her anything. The girl was beside herself with excitement. I was wondering how long this secret would be kept, so I planned a weekend camping trip for us. Sarah. For the past few days, Matilda has been looking at me with wide eyes and real excitement. She laughs a little every time she looks at me. I told her that the three of us were going camping on Saturday, and she ran to her bedroom to pack her things, and it was only Thursday. Dan wanted to take a walk to his favorite park and have a picnic. As we got out of the car, she grabbed Dan's hand and whispered something in his ear. He nodded back at her, and she laughed and looked at me. Something happened. I had a good idea what it could be. When we got to the picnic area, we had everything ready and my daughter could barely stand still. She was spinning and almost turning herself inside out. Dan looked at her and asked, "Well, do you think now is the right time?" She nodded and giggled. I was pretty sure I knew what would happen next. I wasn't disappointed. Dan reached into his backpack and pulled out a small box. Oh my God, he really does it. He got down on one knee, took my hand, and looked into my eyes. Sarah, I love you so much, and I want us to always be together as a family. Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife? I held my breath as I waited for his words, and when they came, they had just as much impact as I imagined. This was an offer not only to me, but also to my daughter. We came as a comprehensive offer. But he knew it and told her about his plan to propose before we even planned the hike. Matilda was aware of Dan's plan from the very beginning. She wanted him to become her father, just as I wanted him to become my husband, and he wanted me to become his wife. I had been dreaming about this day for a long time, ever since I went camping on Dan's parents' land yacht. It confirmed to me that he was the right man to be my husband, and the right man to be the father of Matilda and the child I was carrying. Yes. Dan jumped on me and kissed me. Matilda jumped towards us both and hugged us. Dan. Well, you could say that I surprised Sarah, but that would be an exaggeration. She was the only one who really surprised me. When she said yes to my marriage proposal, I was a very happy person. Life was becoming the way I wanted it to be. And then she made a sudden jerk forward. After we finished hugging and kissing, and Matilda announced to her mother that she was going to start calling me Daddy, I was going to suggest that we pack up our things and go share our news with her mom and dad. She announced, I have a surprise for you. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small white plastic thing and handed it to me. Congratulations, Dad. I looked at her. There were 2 blue lines in the small window. I had to look at it again to understand what it meant. My eyes widened, my mouth was open. I looked at Sarah and she nodded at me. Yes, already 5 weeks, while traveling on a land yacht. I hugged my future wife and kissed her. Laura. Today I was walking downtown and saw Dan on the other side of the street with a woman and 2 children. I had to look twice because at first I wasn't sure if it was him. When I looked again, I realized that it really was him. He was with a woman and a little girl, and they were pushing a stroller with a child in it. The woman was clearly pregnant. I guessed she was about 6 months or so. They laughed. The little girl, who looked to be 4 or 5 years old, was holding Dan's hand tightly. At that very moment, I realized what I could have had if I hadn't been so crazy. My life has been a series of one-night stands and short-term relationships. I saw that he found happiness, and it was not with me. Karma, bitch, Dan. I have to say that 2.5 years ago, when my fictitious marriage with Laura fell apart, I could not have predicted the turn my life would take. I found what I wanted, I found a woman I could love, and she would love me. Sarah is wonderful, and she makes me incredibly happy. In addition to my wife, I had a daughter. Matilda is a powerhouse. I sometimes say that it runs on nuclear power, and there is no switch. I think she likes having a father. My mom and dad are incredibly happy that they have grandchildren to spoil. My dad even converted the inside of his trailer to accommodate proper passenger seats that could attach child seats and were forward-facing. I didn't ask him to do it, he just did it. My mom loves to bake treats for the kids, even though the baby is only a year old. She talks incessantly. Sarah is pregnant with her third child. We bought a new house, new for us. This is a big old house that I'm planning to renovate. Sarah is doing the design, and I'll be doing the construction. Her father says we should start our own company. He's probably right, and after the baby is born and we let the dust settle, we'll come up with a plan. At the last family barbecue, Sarah's father and my father talked, and then announced to the two of us that when we were ready to sit down and talk about business, they would have ideas and some funding. I'm not sure I want them to be that involved, but we can talk about it. I just want to make sure I can feed my family. Sarah, I thank my lucky stars every day that I found such a wonderful person. Dan is a wonderful husband and father. Matilda loves him to the moon and back. Our baby Adrian is 1 year old, and she and her big sister are holding her dad tightly in their little fingers. Number 3 is on the way, and I think it will be a boy. Every now and then I think about Dan's ex, Laura, and I can't help but think that her loss is my gain. How could she be so stupid as to lose this man? He was ready to ignore her shortcomings, and they were great, just to get her love in return. But she gave it to every other man she met. Stupid. Okay, I have a family to take care of, and I need to get back to work. You should always remember what is important to you and take care of that first. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.